My name is Captain Alina Roth, and at 30 years old, I was taught that loyalty was the bedrock of everything to my country, to my unit, and to my family. But in a plush Denver law office, I learned the cruelest lesson of all. As the will of my grandmother, the hero of my life, was declared non existent. My father, Harvey Roth, turned to me, his smile as sharp as a blade. He spoke just loud enough for everyone to hear. You see, Alina, this is the real world. Not some game where you play commander to a bunch of boys. Roth Enterprises needs an heir, not a grunt. My younger brother, Brandon, snickered beside him. They didn't just steal my inheritance. They turned 12 years of service to my country into a cheap joke over my grandmother's fresh grave. They thought the battle was over. But they forgot one thing she taught me. A soldier never abandons her mission. If you've ever had your life's dedication thrown away like trash by your own family, let me know where you're listening from. Hit that like button and subscribe, because you're about to hear a story of how trampled honor became the sharpest weapon of all. The signal came from a world away. I was at Ramstein Air Base in Germany, where the air is crisp and life is defined by the sterile order of routine. The rhythmic crunch of boots on gravel, the precise timetables, the unwavering chain of command. It was a world that made sense. Then the call came, a crackle of static over a bad connection, and my world shattered. It wasn't even my father who called, it was his assistant. The words were clinical, detached. There's been an incident, a severe stroke. Your grandmother, Eleanor. I was granted emergency leave immediately. The long flight back to Denver was a 16-hour purgatory in a pressurized metal tube, suspended between the life I knew and the life that was unraveling. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. All I could do was stare out at the endless expanse of clouds below, my mind replaying a lifetime of memories. I remembered her teaching me how to tie a proper soldier's knot in my bootlaces when I was 10, her calloused fingers patiently guiding mine. Strong knots for a strong woman, she'd said. I remembered her standing alone, a proud, solitary figure in the crowd at my West Point graduation, her applause the only sound I truly heard. She was the only one in my family who understood that my uniform wasn't a costume. It was my skin. My service wasn't a phase, it was my purpose. As the plane began its descent over the snow-dusted peaks of the Rockies, a single, desperate prayer looped in my mind. Let me make it in time. Please, just let me make it. I walked into Denver Health Hospital and was met with a scene so profoundly alien it felt like a play. In the hushed, antiseptic-smelling hallway, my father, Harvey Roth, stood with his back to me, phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low, urgent murmur about market volatility and the S&P 500. A few feet away, my brother Brandon was slouched in a chair, scrolling through his phone, complaining loudly enough for the nurses to hear that he'd have to cancel his annual ski trip to Aspen. They were strangers inhabiting the bodies of my family. I didn't break stride. I walked past them as if they were ghosts and pushed open the door to my grandmother's room. The incessant soft beeping of machines was the only sound. Eleanor Roth, the formidable matriarch who had built an empire from nothing, looked small and fragile against the stark white sheets, her skin as thin as parchment. But when her eyes found mine, they were as sharp and clear as ever. I took her hand. It was cold, but her grip was surprisingly strong. She pulled me closer, and her voice, a reedy whisper, was forged from steel. Elena, she commanded, hold fast to what I taught you. Don't let them take it. It wasn't a plea. It was her final order. A few hours later, with my hand still wrapped around hers, she was gone. The funeral was a grand, cold affair, a testament more to the Roth family's influence than to the woman we were supposed to be mourning. Harvey worked the room like it was a corporate mixer, shaking hands, accepting condolences with the practiced grief of a politician. He saw his mother's death not as a tragedy, but as a networking opportunity. I stood apart, a silent observer in a black dress, feeling more like a soldier on guard duty than a grieving granddaughter. A week later, we were all gathered in the 40th floor conference room of Norman Pierce's law firm, the Denver skyline sprawling out behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows. I sat straight-backed, my hands folded calmly on the polished mahogany table, prepared to shoulder the legacy my grandmother had built. I knew she had groomed me for this, trusting me to lead Roth Enterprises with the same honor and integrity she had. Norman Pierce cleared his throat, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses. He shuffled some papers, his eyes never quite meeting mine. After a thorough review of all documents, he began, his voice smooth and rehearsed. We have determined that Eleanor Roth passed away without a valid will on file. The silence in the room was absolute. For a moment, I couldn't process the words. No will? My grandmother was a master strategist. She planned everything from construction bids to vacation itineraries with military precision. The idea she would leave her entire empire to chance was impossible. Then I saw it. The slow reptilian smile spreading across my father's face, the triumphant glint in Brandon's eyes as he shot a look at Harvey, and in that sickening moment, I understood. This wasn't an oversight. This was a coup. That was when my father twisted the knife. He leaned back in his leather chair, the picture of condescending power, and said my name. You see, Alina, this is the real world. Not some game where you play commander to a bunch of boys. Roth Enterprises needs an heir, not a grunt. A quiet snicker came from my brother. He leaned toward me, his breath smelling of expensive coffee. Welcome to the real world, sis, he whispered. My training kicked in. You do not show weakness to the enemy. My face remained a mask of calm composure, my posture unwavering. But inside, the floor had fallen away. They hadn't just erased her final wishes. They had erased my entire life's purpose in a single, cruel sentence. The final execution came 2 days later, in the corner office that had once been my grandmother's. My father didn't ask me to sit. He stood behind her massive oak desk, a king on a stolen throne. Effective immediately, I'm appointing Brandon as the new CEO of Roth Enterprises, he stated, no emotion in his voice. He understands the business. He paused, looking at me as if I were a stranger, an inconvenient problem to be dealt with. Your place is in the army, Alina, not the boardroom. The company doesn't need you. And that was it. In the span of a week, I had lost my grandmother, my inheritance, and the future I had been promised. The future for which I'd already filed my discharge papers. I had been dispossessed, betrayed, and cast aside with the clinical efficiency of a corporate downsizing. They left me behind enemy lines, stripped of everything, believing I was defeated. But my grandmother had given me one final order. And a soldier never abandons her mission. My discharge from the army was finalized, severing the last official tie to the only life I'd truly known. I was a civilian now, stranded in Denver, a city that was supposed to be my home, but felt like a foreign country. Armed with a resume that boasted leadership experience, logistical expertise, and commendations for service, I thought finding a position in project management would be straightforward. I was wrong. My last name, once a key, had become a lock. I'd walk into gleaming corporate offices in the Denver Tech Center, my suit perfectly pressed, my handshake firm. The interviews always started well. They'd be impressed by my credentials, by the discipline etched into my posture. Then would come the shift. A subtle change in the eyes, a tightening of the smile. The questions would turn vague, circling a topic they were too polite to name directly. The most direct one came from a hiring manager at a major logistics firm. He leaned forward, tapping his pen on my file. Your record is impeccable, Captain Roth. Truly. But we've heard whispers that you've had some difficulties adjusting back to civilian life. He made it sound like a kindness, a gentle inquiry into my well-being. But I heard the real words underneath. Unstable, damaged, risky. I thanked him for his time and walked out into the cold Colorado air, the truth hitting me with the force of a physical blow. My father wasn't just disowning me, he was poisoning the well. He was systematically dismantling my reputation, ensuring I had nowhere else to go. The calls he made were chillingly effective. I learned later he'd personally phoned a few of his influential contacts, his voice dripping with false concern. My daughter, he'd say. She's going through a tough time after her service. A little unstable, you know how it is. He weaponized my service, turning my honor into a diagnosis. With savings dwindling and my small apartment feeling more like a cell every day, my options narrowed to nothing. I took the jobs no one else wanted. By day, I was a logistics manager for a small, struggling trucking company on the industrial outskirts of the city, coordinating shipments from a cramped, dusty office that smelled of stale coffee and diesel fumes. By night, I worked security, supervising construction sites for a contractor who paid cash under the table. I brought military precision to both. My shipping manifests were flawless, my security patrols were methodical. But the humiliation was a constant, quiet companion. I, who had once commanded a company of 200 soldiers, was now reduced to checking chain-link fences for breaches and counting crates of machine parts. Every night, walking the perimeter of a dark, muddy construction site under the cold glow of temporary floodlights, I felt the bitter irony. I had traded a battlefield for this. A memory from my SEER training, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, surfaced one particularly grueling night. I remembered being cold, hungry, and hunted in the forests of North Carolina, the instructors pushing us to our absolute limits. They taught us that when they strip everything away from you, your gear, your rank, your name, the only thing you have left is your will to survive. Standing there in the Denver cold, I whispered to myself, "This is just another SEER exercise. This is just another test." The ultimate test, however, came not in the mud and dirt, but under the glittering chandeliers of my family's prison. It was some holiday party or charity gala, they all blurred together, held at my father's sprawling mansion in Cherry Creek Hills. Attendance wasn't optional, it was a command performance meant to maintain the illusion of a happy, unified family. I stood in a corner, holding a glass of club soda, feeling as out of place as a soldier in enemy territory. Brandon, basking in his new role as CEO, was holding court, surrounded by sycophants and business partners. He spotted me across the room. A malicious grin spread across his face as he sauntered over, a champagne flute in his hand. He gestured toward me with the glass, his voice loud enough for the entire circle to hear. "See?" he announced, his tone dripping with mock affection. "My sister, Elena. We keep telling her she belongs in the boardroom with us, but she's just more comfortable out in the field. Checking fences suits her better, I guess." A few people chuckled uncomfortably, while others just stared. I looked past Brandon to my father, who was standing right behind him. Harvey didn't silence him. He didn't correct him. He simply gave a slight, approving nod, a silent endorsement of the public humiliation. Then he raised his own glass. "To Brandon," Harvey declared, looking around the circle, but pointedly ignoring me. "The future of Roth Enterprises, a true leader." The words hung in the air, a final public execution of my worth. I placed my untouched drink on a passing waiter's tray, turned without a word, and walked out of that house. My hands were clenched so tightly into fists that my nails dug into my palms, the sharp pain a welcome distraction from the inferno of rage and shame burning in my chest. I didn't let a single tear fall. Tears were a luxury I couldn't afford. The first flicker of hope came from the most unexpected place. A few weeks later, I was grabbing a late-night coffee at a gritty 24/7 diner off I-25, a place filled with tired truckers and third-shift workers. A man in a worn-out Roth Enterprises work jacket slid into the booth opposite me. He was older, his face lined with the kind of wrinkles that come from years of hard work and honest living. I recognized him, Manny, a foreman who had worked for my grandmother for 30 years. He looked around nervously, keeping his voice low. "Miss Roth," he whispered, his eyes full of a respect I hadn't seen in months. "I shouldn't be talking to you, but what they did, it ain't right." I just listened, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "I overheard things," he continued, leaning closer. "The old boss, your grandmother, she definitely had a will. I saw her sign in papers with Mr. Pierce myself just a month before. You know. But after she passed, I heard talk about how that will just disappeared, real strange like. He looked me straight in the eye, his gaze unwavering. She was a planner, your grandma. She wouldn't have left things to chance. Not ever. He quickly paid for his coffee and left, melting back into the night. But his words remained, echoing in the silence of the dingy diner. She wouldn't have left things to chance. He was right. My grandmother, a meticulous strategist, would never have left her empire unprotected. His words didn't just confirm my suspicions, they ignited something within me. The smoldering embers of my anger and grief finally caught flame. I was no longer a victim adrift in despair. I was a soldier who had just received critical intelligence. My mission, once clouded by betrayal, was now crystal clear. And my first objective was to find the truth. The days bled into a monotonous cycle of survival. Wake, work, eat, sleep, repeat. Denver was being pounded by a relentless late autumn storm, the kind that turns the sky a bruised purple and washes the city streets clean. I was sitting in a booth at the 24-hour Greasy Spoon off the highway, the kind of place that smells permanently of bacon and burnt coffee. It was my sanctuary after a grueling 12-hour shift, a place where no one knew the name Roth, where I was just another tired face seeking refuge from the rain lashing against the windows. I was nursing a mug of black coffee, watching the headlights of semis slice through the downpour, when a man detached himself from the shadows of a corner booth and walked toward me. He was older, maybe in his late 60s, with the quiet, coiled stillness of a man who had seen conflict. He wasn't big, but he was solid, carved from the kind of tough material that doesn't break. He stopped at my table. "Captain Roth?" he asked, his voice a low gravel. It wasn't a question, but a confirmation. The use of my rank was a jolt, a word I hadn't heard directed at me with respect in months. My training immediately took over. I assessed him in a glance, worn but clean clothes, calloused hands, eyes that were observant and missed nothing. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Do I know you?" "My name is Connor Marshall," he said, sliding into the booth opposite me. "I served with your grandmother." He didn't say where or when, but the way he said it implied a bond deeper than a typical service record. "I have something of hers, something she entrusted to me to give directly to you." My guard went up. In my world, unexpected packages were rarely good news. "Why didn't you give it to me at the funeral?" Connor's gaze flickered toward the door, a reflexive, cautionary glance. I tried to reach out. The day after she passed, I was paid a visit by two gentlemen who strongly suggested I forget I ever knew Eleanor Roth. They weren't the polite kind. He lifted his left hand, showing me knuckles that were swollen and purpled. "I've been laying low ever since, waiting for the right time. Your father plays rough, Captain." He reached into his jacket and slid a thick manila envelope across the sticky tabletop. "Eleanor didn't trust Harvey, or that snake Pierce. She said if anything were to happen to her, I was to make sure this got into your hands, and your hands only." He looked at me then, his eyes filled with an unwavering loyalty that felt like a lifeline. I remember a time, back in the service, when a young private was being hazed mercilessly by his superiors. Eleanor, a commanding officer, stepped in and shut it down. She ruined a man's career to save that kid's. She told me later, "You never leave your people behind, Connor." Your grandmother never abandoned her people, Captain. Neither do I. He stood up, gave a short, almost imperceptible nod, and was gone, vanishing back into the stormy night as quickly as he had appeared. I was left staring at the envelope, my heart hammering against my ribs. Back in the sterile quiet of my small apartment in Capitol Hill, I locked the door and leaned against it, the rain still drumming a frantic rhythm against the window pane. With trembling fingers, I tore open the envelope. It wasn't just a package, it was an armory. The first document was a legally certified copy of a will, dated just 1 month before my grandmother's death. I scanned the pages, my breath catching in my throat. The language was clear, precise, and irrefutable. I, Captain Alina Roth, was named the sole heir to the controlling shares of Roth Enterprises and the executrix of her estate. My father was allocated a generous trust, but one he couldn't touch without my approval. Brandon was given a university fund and nothing more. It was all there, in black and white. Tucked behind the will was a handwritten letter on her personal stationery. Her script, usually so elegant and strong, was slightly shaky, but the words were pure Eleanor. My dearest Alina, it began. If you are reading this, then my fears have come to pass. Your father is a good businessman, but a weak man, and weak men are dangerous when they crave power. Do not mourn me. Fight. Use the mind I have seen you sharpen, the courage I have seen you prove. Your honor is your uniform. Never take it off. I am with you, always. At the bottom of the envelope was a small black USB flash drive. I plugged it into my laptop, my hand shaking so badly it took 2 tries. A single audio file appeared on the screen. I clicked play, and then I heard her voice. It was weak, strained from her hospital bed, but it was unmistakably her. The sound of it, so real and present, was a punch to the gut. It was a voice memo, recorded just a day before she died. She spoke of her suspicions about Harvey meeting secretly with Pierce, of funds being moved in strange ways. She mentioned creating a copy of the will and giving it to Connor, her most trusted friend. Hearing her voice, her mind still sharp as a tack even at the end, was like getting a direct order from the heavens. I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me. For the past few months, I'd been surviving, enduring. But listening to that recording, I felt a profound shift inside me. The fog of grief and despair finally lifted, replaced by the cold, clear certainty of a soldier who has just been handed vital intelligence. This was no longer just a family tragedy. It was a conspiracy. I was no longer a discarded daughter. I was an intelligence officer at the start of a new campaign. I stood up from my chair, the exhaustion of the last few months falling away like a shed skin. My mission was clear. Reclaim what was stolen. Execute justice. Honor her final command. That night, a flicker of faith I thought I'd lost returned to me. I remembered a verse from Isaiah my grandmother loved. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. If you've ever felt like you were all alone in your fight and suddenly received a sign that you weren't, please hit that like button to show your support. And in the comments, just type a simple, I understand. Let me know you're with me on this. My reflection in the dark window showed a woman I hadn't seen in a long time. The victim was gone. A warrior stared back. I took a deep, steadying breath. My mind, trained for strategy and conflict, began to race, assembling the pieces, formulating a plan of attack. I had the intelligence. I had the objective. Now, there was only one question left to answer. What's the next move? My question, what's the next move, demanded an answer rooted in strategy, not emotion. The military taught me that every successful campaign begins with a solid plan and the right personnel. My grief was fuel, but discipline would be my compass. I spent the next 48 hours in my small apartment, not sleeping, but working. The process was automatic, a drill etched into me, the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act, observe. I had the enemy's position and a key piece of intelligence, the copied will. Orient, I understood their tactics, legal manipulation backed by financial power and intimidation. Decide, I could not fight this war alone. I needed legal firepower. I needed ground-level intelligence. Act, recruit my first ally. My research led me to one name, Stephen Ellsworth, a top litigator in Denver with a reputation for taking on an opponent's biggest guns and dismantling them piece by piece. His website described him as relentless. His biography mentioned he was a former Marine. That sealed it. Ellsworth's office was on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper, a space of quiet, understated power. Framed legal degrees shared wall space with a respectfully displayed Marine Corps flag. He was a man in his 50s, fit and sharp, with eyes that assessed me with unnerving speed. I didn't present myself as a grieving daughter. I was a commanding officer delivering a situation brief. I laid out the evidence on his conference table, the certified copy of the will, the handwritten letter, the USB drive. This is the objective, I began, my voice steady. To have this will validated. The opposing force consists of my father, Harvey Roth, my brother, Brandon Roth, and their counsel, Norman Pierce. Their primary strength is financial superiority. Their critical weakness is the illegality of their actions. I played him the audio file. He listened intently, his face unreadable. When it finished, he was silent for a long moment. I didn't fidget, I waited. Finally, he looked up, and I saw a fellow soldier. They have deep pockets and a team of lawyers who will bury us in motions, he warned, his voice a calm baritone. A copy of a will is a good start, Captain, but it's not a silver bullet. To win this, we need to prove criminal intent, fraud, conspiracy. He leaned forward. This will be a fight. Are you prepared? I am, I said without hesitation. A slow smile touched his lips. Good. He stood and extended his hand. Captain, I'm not taking this case for the money. I'm taking it because it's the right mission. He gripped my hand firmly. Semper Fi. In that moment, hearing that phrase from a Marine, I felt a surge of validation so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. He saw me not as a grunt, but as a fellow officer. My family had denied my identity, but this stranger, this brother-in-arms, had just handed it back to me. Our first strategy session was immediate. We need to corroborate the existence of the original will, Ellsworth stated. We need a witness who can place it in Norman Pierce's possession. My mind jumped to the intelligence gathering techniques I knew best. Human intelligence, or HUMINT. Pierce's former secretary just quit 2 weeks ago, I said, pulling up the info on my phone. Elena Garcia, resigned for personal reasons. It feels convenient. Ellsworth nodded. She's our first intel target, but she'll be scared. Pierce and your father likely paid her a generous severance to ensure her silence. Let me handle it, I said. A lawyer will feel like a threat. I'll approach her as something else. I found Elena at a quiet, trendy coffee shop in Lodo. She was a nervous woman in her late 40s, her hands trembling so much she could barely hold her cup. When I introduced myself, her face went pale. I can't talk to you. I signed an NDA. I didn't press. I sat down and spoke quietly, not about the law, but about my grandmother. I told her about Eleanor's integrity, about how she treated every employee with dignity. I spoke of the betrayal I felt, the pain of seeing a good woman's legacy desecrated. I wasn't interrogating a source. I was connecting with a human being. Tears welled in Elena's eyes. Her loyalty to my grandmother was stronger than her fear of Norman Pierce. I saw it, she whispered, her voice cracking. The original will. It was in Mr. Pierce's private safe. He took it out after a meeting with your father, the day after the funeral. Then, after another secret meeting, it was just gone. He told me to shred all the draft copies. She started to cry softly. He gave me a bonus. Told me it was for my years of service. I knew it was hush money. It was the first piece of corroboration, the first crack in their fortress. The enemy, however, was not idle. A few days later, I started to feel it, the prickling sensation on the back of my neck that tells you you're being watched. A black sedan that always seemed to be 2 cars behind me in traffic. A man reading a newspaper on a park bench across from my apartment for a little too long. My father had realized I wasn't going away quietly. He had deployed his own surveillance. I reported it to Ellsworth. His face grew grim. He's trying to intimidate you. We need to counter. He made a call, then gave me a name and an address. Connor Marshall recommended him, said he's the best. The name was Jack Sheridan. His office was a small, unassuming space above a bookstore. His bio was short. Former Army CID, Criminal Investigation Division. He was a quiet, methodical man with eyes that saw everything. Once again, I delivered a mission brief, not a plea for help. I'm being followed. I need you to run counter-surveillance and identify the operator. Secondary mission. The primary is financial reconnaissance. I need you to investigate all cash withdrawals and unvouchered expenses from Harvey Roth and Norman Pierce, starting the day my grandmother died. Find anything that can't be explained. Jack listened without interruption, his expression unchanging. When I was finished, he simply nodded. I'm on it. Walking out of his office and back into the Denver streets, I felt a sense of calm clarity. My team was in place. Ellsworth was my legal command. Elena was my first human asset. Jack was my intelligence unit. The alliance was formed. The operation was now active. The moment I declared war, the battlefield shifted. It was no longer confined to law offices and hushed conversations. The city of Denver itself became hostile territory. A drill instructor from my early days at Fort Benning used to scream at us until he was hoarse, his face inches from mine. Complacency kills faster than a sniper's bullet. That voice became a permanent echo in my head. Complacency was a luxury I could not afford. It started subtly. A black sedan, a common model, easily overlooked, that appeared in my rearview mirror on Spear Boulevard and was still there when I exited onto I-25. Coincidence, maybe. But when I saw it parked down the street from my apartment the next day, coincidence was off the table. My training took over, my senses sharpening to a razor's edge. My world shrank to a series of tactical assessments. Every drive to work became a counter-surveillance route. I'd take 3 consecutive right turns to see who followed. I'd vary my schedule, leaving for my security shift at different times, using different routes. I was an operator again, and Denver was my AO, my area of operations. The surveillance was meant to be seen. It was a psychological tactic, a constant silent pressure designed to unnerve me, to make me feel exposed and powerless. But they had misjudged their target. Fear was an old acquaintance of mine, and I knew how to manage it. I treated their surveillance not as a threat, but as a confirmation. I was getting close to something they were desperate to protect. Then came the escalation. I came out of my apartment one frigid morning to find my old Subaru's tires slashed. All 4 of them, a deliberate act of malice. Tucked under the driver's side windshield wiper was a single, folded piece of paper. My breath plumed in the cold air as I unfolded it. The message was typed in stark block letters. Stop before it's too late. My first reaction wasn't panic. It was a cold, methodical anger. I pulled out my phone. I didn't call the police. This was beyond them. I took a series of photographs from multiple angles, documenting the damage and the note, just like I would at an incident scene. Evidence. I sent the photos to Jack Sheridan with a 1-line text. They've made their move. Then I called for a tow truck. I was a captain, and this was simply an enemy probe of my defenses. I would log it, analyze it, and reinforce my position. The most chilling part came later that day. A text from a blocked number. It read, "Soldiers die on the battlefield. Don't die at home." The words hit me harder than the slashed tires. This was a violation. They were twisting my service, the most honorable part of my life, into a grotesque threat. It was a direct message from my father, I had no doubt. It was his unique brand of cruelty, aiming not just to intimidate, but to degrade. While I was fortifying my defenses, my own intelligence unit was making breakthroughs. Jack Sheridan called me into his dusty office. He slid a folder across his desk. "Your instincts were good," he said, his voice flat and professional. "I ran the financials on Harvey Roth and Norman Pierce. Your father is slick, but he's also arrogant." He pointed to 2 lines on a bank statement. 2 significant cash withdrawals from a personal investment account. $50,000, 2 days after your grandmother passed. That aligns with the timeline for the will's disappearance and Pierce's sudden need for a new secretary. Another $30,000 2 months later. That aligns perfectly with when Connor Marshall was being harassed and had to go underground. He tapped the paper. "This is untraceable cash. There are no receipts, no invoices, no paper trail. It's ghost money. He used it to pay someone for dirty work. We can't prove who he paid yet, but we can prove he paid." There it was. The first concrete link. Not just a suspicion, but a financial fingerprint connecting my father to the conspiracy. This was the ammunition Ellsworth said we needed. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture of greed so profound it was willing to commit fraud, intimidation, and who knew what else. That evening, my phone rang. The caller ID read, Harvey Roth. It was the first time he had called me since he'd cast me out of his office. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep breath, and answered, putting it on speaker. Alina, he began. His voice was different. The smug, dismissive tone was gone, replaced by a low, menacing growl. A predator's voice. I don't know what little game you think you're playing, he hissed. But it ends now. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I remained silent, letting him fill the void. You're a child playing with matches in a gas station, he continued, his voice rising with venom. You need to stop. Stop talking to people. Stop digging. There are things in this world much worse than losing money, Alina. You'd be wise to remember that. His threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. He wasn't just talking about the company anymore. This was a father threatening his own daughter, his voice completely devoid of anything but cold, ruthless ambition. The last shred of hope I might have harbored that this was all some terrible mistake evaporated. A cold calm settled over me. I was done being the victim. I was done being the target. It was time to return fire. I was thinking the same thing, sir, I said, my voice as level and cold as ice. What is that supposed to mean? He snarled. That there are things much worse than losing money, I replied, like losing your honor. I pressed the red icon on the screen, cutting him off mid-sentence. The silence that followed was absolute. The battle lines were no longer implied. The war was now declared. And I knew, with chilling certainty, that he would stop at nothing to win. In warfare, you learn to identify the weakest link in the enemy's chain of command. You apply pressure, exploit the fracture, and watch their entire formation crumble. I had always assumed my father's weakest link was his arrogance or his greed. I never imagined it would be his own son. The message came on a Tuesday night, lighting up my phone with a text from a burner number. The words were terse, demanding. Meet me at the Ship Tavern. Alone. Tell no one. My instincts screamed, trap. The Ship Tavern was a dive bar on South Broadway, the kind of dark, sticky place where trouble was cheap. It was the perfect location for an ambush. But the message also felt desperate, not professional. This wasn't a hitman's text. It was a coward's. Still, I took no chances. I forwarded the message to Jack Sheridan with the time and location. Eyes on me from a distance, I texted. If I'm not out in 20 minutes, come in. I arrived 10 minutes early, slipping in through the back entrance. I chose a booth in the far corner, my back to the wall, with a clear view of both the front and back doors. A solid, defensible position. I ordered a glass of water and waited, my senses on high alert, my mind running through escape routes. Every time the door opened, a jolt of adrenaline shot through me. I was ready for hired muscle, for one of my father's thugs. I was not ready for Brandon. He stumbled in, looking utterly out of place in his $1,000 coat. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by the frantic, hunted energy of a cornered animal. His eyes, wide with panic, darted around the dingy bar before finding me. He practically fell into the booth opposite me, his face pale and slick with sweat. You came, he breathed, his voice a ragged whisper. He couldn't meet my eyes. What is this, Brandon? I asked, my voice low and cold. He flinched. He's insane, Alina. Completely insane. He was trembling, a spoiled child who had just discovered monsters were real. I overheard him. On the phone with Pierce. He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't malice or triumph. It was pure, unadulterated terror. They know you're not stopping, he stammered, his words tumbling over each other. They know you hired Ellsworth, that you talked to Elena. They were talking about a permanent solution. I sat motionless, my blood turning to ice. It wasn't just talk, Alina, he choked out, his voice cracking. They had a plan. They were going to arrange an accident, a robbery gone wrong, something that couldn't be traced back to them. They were talking about it like it was a business deal, like they were planning to shut down an unprofitable subsidiary. The casual brutality of it stole my breath. It was one thing to be threatened, to have my tires slashed. It was another to know my own father had calmly discussed the logistics of my murder. Brandon saw the look on my face and shook his head frantically. "He'll do it, Elena. He won't stop. He's so far over the line, he doesn't even see it anymore. He just sees you as an obstacle." He finally broke, the carefully constructed facade of the golden child shattering into a million pieces. I never signed up for this. Stealing an inheritance is one thing, but this is murder. His fear, I realized, wasn't for me. It was for himself. The golden heir had just realized that if our father was willing to eliminate his own daughter, then everyone was disposable. He was terrified of being an accomplice, of what would happen to his perfect, privileged life if he got caught in the crossfire. With a shaking hand, he pushed a thick sheaf of papers across the table. "I printed these from his computer," he muttered, avoiding my gaze again. I had to guess his password a dozen times. I looked down. It was a stack of emails. A chain of correspondence between Harvey Roth and Norman Pierce. My eyes scanned the text, and I felt a cold, hard certainty settle in my stomach. It was all there. Undeniable. There were coded references to special payments for Pierce, discussions about the management of the will, and a chillingly casual email from my father assuring Pierce that Elena would soon be out of the picture. It was the smoking gun, the silver bullet, the final damning proof of their conspiracy. Brandon pushed himself out of the booth, his movements clumsy and desperate. "I don't want to go to jail with him," he said, his voice pleading. "Take this, and just leave me out of it." He turned and practically ran out of the bar, leaving me alone in the dim light with the evidence of my family's treachery. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the papers. I didn't trust my brother's motives. He acted out of self-preservation, not a crisis of conscience. He was still the same weak, entitled boy I'd always known. But his cowardice had just handed me the weapon I needed to win the war. These emails, combined with Jack's financial reports, Connor's testimony, and Elena's statement, formed an ironclad case. No judge could ignore this. No jury could dismiss it. The power dynamic had shifted completely. I was no longer on the defensive, reacting to their moves. I was now in command. I had the high ground. I had the ammunition. It was time to attack. It's a strange feeling when the person who hurt you the most becomes the source of your victory, isn't it? Their own evil turning back on them. If you believe that justice, no matter how delayed, will always find a way, hit that like button. And tell me in the comments what you think the most satisfying form of justice is. Let's talk about it. I pulled out my phone. My fingers were steady as I scrolled through my contacts and found Stephen Ellsworth's number. He answered on the second ring. "Stephen," I said, my voice clear and strong, cutting through the noise of the bar. "It's Elena." There was no preamble, no hesitation. "We have everything. File the lawsuit." The moment Stephen Ellsworth filed the lawsuit, the Cold War turned hot. My phone call from the dive bar was the signal, and now we were moving from reconnaissance to a full frontal assault. Stephen's office became our command center, our war room. The large mahogany conference table, once a place for corporate negotiations, was now covered with what looked like a tactical map of our campaign. The three of us, me, Stephen, and Jack Sheridan, huddled over it. Jack's financial reports, showing the ghost money withdrawals, were laid out next to a timeline. Elena Garcia's sworn affidavit was placed beside it, her testimony corroborating the timeline of the will's disappearance. Connor Marshall's statement provided the motive and the initial proof. And in the center of it all, like a captured enemy battle plan, lay the stack of emails from Brandon. "Every piece connects," Stephen said, his voice resonating with controlled intensity. He drew lines with a pen on a legal pad, linking one piece of evidence to the next. Connor's testimony establishes Eleanor's intent and distrust. Eleanor's statement proves the original will existed and vanished under suspicious circumstances. Jack's financials provide the means for the conspiracy, the untraceable cash to pay for coercion and concealment. And Brandon's emails. They are the confessions. They tie Harvey and Pierce together in their own words. He looked at me, his eyes sharp. "Our strategy is simple. We don't just argue about the will. We paint a picture of a criminal conspiracy so clear and undeniable that the inheritance dispute becomes a foregone conclusion. It was a lesson from Sun Tzu's The Art of War, a book I'd read many times. Know your enemy and know yourself, and you will not be imperiled in 100 battles. We knew their greed, their arrogance, and we knew our own strength, the truth. The next phase was witness prep. This wasn't about telling people what to say. It was about preparing them for the brutal cross-examinations to come. Stephen and I met with Elena first. She was terrified, twisting a handkerchief in her hands. I didn't talk law with her. I talked about courage, about how her voice was the key to honoring the woman who had been so kind to her. I assured her she was protected. With Connor, it was different. He was a rock. Our job was simply to help him structure his story, to deliver it with the quiet dignity and unwavering honor of a veteran. Then came the call to Brandon. I found him through a private number he'd started using. He answered, his voice wary. I wasn't calling to thank him. I was calling as a commanding officer. Brandon, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. Stephen will be subpoenaing you to testify. You will tell the court exactly what you told me. What? No, He started to protest. Listen to me, I cut him off, my voice like steel. You gave me the evidence to save yourself. The only way you stay out of a jail cell as a co-conspirator is to become a witness for the prosecution. Testify truthfully, and you might get a deal. Lie or refuse, and I will personally make sure they bury you right alongside Dad. It's your only way out. Don't be a fool. I hung up before he could respond. The lawsuit landed like a bombshell in Denver's business circles. The Roth name was suddenly associated with fraud and conspiracy. The shockwaves reached my father immediately. Within days, his high-priced legal team sent a settlement offer to Stephen. It was a staggering amount of money, a sum designed to make any problem disappear. Harvey believed that everything and everyone had a price. Stephen called to give me the details. I didn't even need to hear the number. Tell them no, I said. Elena, this is life-changing money. This was never about money, Stephen. It was about honor. My voice was quiet, but absolute. Give them my official response. 3 words. Which are, he asked. See you in court. The day before the preliminary hearing, our small alliance gathered for a final meeting in Stephen's office. Connor, Jack, Elena, and me. We weren't a legal team. We were a unit. A squad of dissimilar individuals bound by a common mission. There was an unspoken solidarity in the room, a quiet strength. As we were about to leave, Connor placed a heavy, reassuring hand on my shoulder. He looked me in the eye, his gaze steady. Your grandmother would be damn proud of you, Captain, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You're not fighting this alone. We are your unit now. The words hit me with unexpected force. For so long, I had been an island, a soldier behind enemy lines with no support. But looking at the faces around me, a stoic lawyer, a grizzled veteran, a quiet investigator, a terrified but brave woman, I realized I had a family. A family forged not by blood, but by a shared commitment to what was right. That night, sleep was impossible. But it wasn't anxiety that kept me awake, it was focus. A profound, crystalline focus I hadn't felt since I was preparing for a mission overseas. My small apartment became my barracks room. I laid out my dark gray suit on the bed, pressing it with the same care I would give my dress uniform. I polished my black leather shoes until I could see my own determined reflection in them. Every action was a ritual, a preparation for the battle to come. I stood before the small framed photograph of my grandmother that sat on my dresser. Her smile in the picture was warm, her eyes full of the fierce intelligence I knew so well. I stood at attention, a silent promise passing between the woman in the frame and the soldier staring back at her. Tomorrow, Grandma, I whispered into the quiet of the room. Tomorrow I complete your final order. I was ready. The courtroom was a theater of hushed anticipation. My father and Norman Pierce walked in as if they were arriving at a business luncheon, radiating an aura of untouchable arrogance. They nodded at their lawyers, surveyed the room with disdain, and settled into their chairs, treating the entire proceeding as a minor inconvenience, a piece of corporate litigation to be swatted away. Their lead attorney, a slick man with a silver tongue, opened with a character assassination. He painted me as a disgruntled daughter, emotionally unstable after her time in the military, lashing out with fabricated claims because she didn't get what she felt she was entitled to. I sat beside Stephen, my back ramrod straight, my hands folded in my lap. I focused on my breathing, a combat technique to maintain calm under fire. Inhale, exhale. I did not flinch. I did not react. I simply watched them build their house of cards, knowing I held the evidence that would burn it to the ground. The prosecution calls its first witness, Stephen announced, his voice clear and steady. Mr. Connor Marshall. Connor walked to the witness stand with the measured, dignified gait of a career soldier. In his simple, clean-cut suit, he exuded more honor than my father and his entire legal team combined. He took the oath, his voice firm, and then Stephen began. Connor recounted my grandmother's final days, her fears, and the final order she had given him. He described the thugs who had visited him, the threats, the reason he had to go into hiding. On cross-examination, my father's lawyer went on the attack. Mr. Marshall, you're a disgruntled former associate, aren't you? Perhaps you felt Mrs. Roth didn't compensate you adequately for your friendship? Connor didn't rise to the bait. He didn't look at the lawyer. He turned his head slightly and looked directly at the jury. Sir, I served my country for 30 years, he said, his voice quiet but carrying immense weight. In the military, a soldier's word, a soldier's promise, is all they have. I gave Eleanor Roth my word. I kept my promise. You could feel the atmosphere in the courtroom shift. The jury was no longer looking at him as a witness. They were looking at him as a man of honor. Then came the moment. Your Honor, Stephen said. At this time, we would like to play an audio recording recovered from a USB drive given to my client by the late Eleanor Roth. The defense attorney leaped to his feet. Objection, provenance, chain of custody. It has been authenticated, Your Honor, Stephen replied calmly. The recording contains Mrs. Roth's own voice. The judge peered over his glasses. I'll allow it. The jury will give it the weight it deserves. A technician connected the drive. A soft hiss filled the room, and then, her voice. My grandmother's voice, frail but resolute, echoed from the speakers. It was the voice from the hospital bed, clear and lucid, detailing her suspicions about Harvey and Pierce, mentioning the copied will, and entrusting Connor with her final wishes. I don't trust what Harvey is capable of. Her voice crackled through the silent room. He only sees the company, not the family, not the honor. The room was utterly still. It was as if a ghost had just entered the witness box. I watched my father's face. The arrogant confidence drained away, replaced by a ghastly pale shock. He looked like he had seen an apparition. Norman Pierce, next to him, began to sweat, a single bead trickling down his temple. The voice from the past was an indictment from the grave, and it was irrefutable. The judge's face was grim. He banged his gavel, the sound cracking like a whip. This court is in recess. Based on the evidence just presented, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal investigation. Pandemonium. The civil case was over. The criminal case had just begun. Weeks later, we were back, but the stakes were infinitely higher. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about prison time. Jack's financial reports were presented as evidence, the massive cash withdrawals laid bare for the jury to see. The emails Brandon had given me were displayed on a large screen, every word a nail in my father's coffin. The prosecution had built an airtight case of fraud, conspiracy, and witness tampering, but the final devastating blow was yet to come. The prosecution calls Brandon Roth to the stand. My brother walked to the witness box like a man walking to the gallows. He was thin, pale, a shadow of the smug prince I had seen at the family party. He refused to look at our father, keeping his eyes fixed on the floor as he took the oath. The prosecutor's questions were simple, direct. Mr. Roth, do you recognize these emails? Yes, Brandon whispered, his voice barely audible. Did you see your father, Harvey Roth, compose them. Yes. And what was the subject of the conspiracy discussed in these emails? Brandon took a shaky breath. He finally risked a glance at our father. Harvey was staring at him, his eyes burning with a furious, silent command to lie. But for the first time in his life, my brother's fear of our father was eclipsed by his fear of the consequences. They were planning to destroy my grandmother's will, Brandon said, the words rushing out in a torrent of confession. They paid Mr. Pierce to make it disappear. They wanted to ensure I became CEO and that my sister got nothing. He finally looked at me, his eyes full of a pathetic mix of apology and terror. A strangled sound escaped from my father's throat. It was the sound of a king being dethroned, of an empire crumbling to dust. He slumped in his chair, his face ashen, the arrogant mask finally shattered, revealing the hollow man underneath. He was beaten. Not by me, not by the lawyers, but by the chain of events his own greed had set in motion. The guilty verdict was a formality. Harvey Roth was sentenced to 10 to 15 years in a state penitentiary for fraud and conspiracy. Norman Pierce was disbarred and received a similar sentence. Justice, swift and merciless, had finally been served. The war was over. I had won. But as I stood amidst the wreckage of my own family, I didn't feel like a victor. I just felt tired. So incredibly tired. With the criminal trial concluded, the probate court moved swiftly. The original will, now recovered, was validated. The judge's gavel fell one last time, and just like that, it was official. I was the legal heir to my grandmother's empire. The war was over. I had won. But there were no victory parades, no celebratory champagne toasts. Stephen and Jack shook my hand, their faces reflecting a somber respect. Connor gave me a firm, supportive nod. Then they left, and I walked out of the courthouse alone. I drove back to my small apartment, the silence in the car amplifying the ringing in my ears. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, the quiet pressing in. I had won back my future, my grandmother's legacy, my honor. But the cost was a father in prison and a family shattered beyond repair. The adrenaline that had sustained me for months drained away, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. I felt like a soldier returning from a long and brutal war, only to find that the home I'd been fighting for no longer existed. My first day at Roth Enterprises as CEO was a lesson in ruins. The corner office that had been my grandmother's felt vast and empty. The company she had built on a foundation of integrity and grit was now teetering on the edge of collapse. The scandal had been a public spectacle. Loyal employees were demoralized and uncertain about their futures. Key partners, spooked by the instability and the stench of scandal, had already started pulling their contracts. The phones were ringing with cancellations, not new business. Standing there, looking out over the Denver skyline, I realized the courtroom battle had only been the first engagement. The real war, the fight to save my grandmother's life's work from the ashes of my father's greed, had just begun. This was a new mission, more complex and daunting than any I had faced before. A few days into my new command, my assistant buzzed. "Ma'am," she said, her voice hesitant, "your brother is here to see you." Brandon was shown in. He was a ghost of his former self, gaunt and hollow-eyed, the designer suit hanging loosely on his frame. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the vast office, looking small and lost. He wasn't here to ask for money or a job. I could see that immediately. He started, his voice barely a whisper. "I was wrong. For everything. I'm sorry, Elena." I looked at him, truly looked at him, not with a sister's contempt, but with a commander's assessment. I saw the weakness, the fear, the lifetime of entitlement that had led him to this point. But I also saw a flicker of something else, a devastating, humbling self-awareness. He had been forced to look in the mirror, and he was shattered by what he saw. "An apology is a start, Brandon," I said, my voice even and calm. "But redemption is earned through action, not words." I walked around the desk and stood before him. "You want to be sorry?" Be sorry on a construction site? You want to make amends? Make amends with a shovel in your hands. His eyes widened in disbelief. I'm giving you an opportunity, I continued. Not a handout. You'll start at the bottom. General laborer on the new downtown project. You'll be paid minimum wage. You'll work the same hours as everyone else. No special treatment, no shortcuts. I held his gaze, letting the weight of my words sink in. Your name won't help you there. Your trust fund is gone. Go prove your own worth. Go find your own honor. He just stared at me for a long moment, his mouth slightly agape. Then, for the first time, he gave a slow, single nod of understanding. He turned and walked out of my office without another word. It wasn't a solution, but it was a path. A week later, a letter arrived, postmarked from the Colorado State Penitentiary. The handwriting was my father's. My first instinct was to tear it up, to throw the final remnants of that toxic connection into the trash. But a soldier faces the enemy, even when the enemy is a memory. I slit the envelope open. It wasn't an apology. I knew better than to expect one. Men like Harvey Roth don't apologize. They reframe reality to fit their narrative. The letter was short, the words clipped and devoid of emotion. He wrote about the company, about market trends, as if he were writing to a business associate. But the last two sentences were for me. She always said you had the will of a soldier, he wrote. I never believed her. I believe her now. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't love. It was a concession, a reluctant admission of defeat from one strategist to another. It was the only kind of respect he was capable of giving, and it was the only kind I would ever get from him. I read the letter one more time, then folded it neatly and placed it in a box deep within my closet. The past was now where it belonged, filed away, acknowledged, but no longer in command. That night, I found myself thinking of a quote by Winston Churchill my grandmother had framed on her desk. Success is not final, failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. My victory in court wasn't the end. My father's failure wasn't the end. This, the daunting task of rebuilding a legacy, of leading a company back from the brink, of forging a new future from the wreckage of the past, this was the continuation. My new mission. And I had the courage to see it through. Rebuilding an empire from its ruins is not unlike securing a post-conflict zone. The first step is to establish a clear chain of command. In my first week as CEO, I didn't focus on spreadsheets or profit margins. I focused on personnel. I walked the floors of Roth Enterprises from the executive suites to the drafting rooms, observing, listening. My father's tenure, though brief, had been toxic. He had promoted sycophants and yes-men, people who valued loyalty to him over competence. They were the first to go. I terminated their positions with the swift, impersonal efficiency of a field commander relieving an incompetent officer. In their place, I promoted from within, identifying the quiet, dedicated employees my grandmother had trusted, the ones who had stayed loyal to her vision, not to the title of CEO. At my first company-wide town hall meeting, I stood before hundreds of anxious employees. I didn't stand behind a podium. I stood in the center of the floor with them. I didn't talk to them like a boss. I spoke to them like a commanding officer addressing her unit. For the last few months, this company has operated without a clear mission and without a code of conduct, I began, my voice carrying across the silent atrium. That ends today. Our new mission is simple: to build with integrity, to lead with honor, and to finish every project with the pride our founder, Eleanor Roth, instilled in us. I outlined my plan, not with corporate jargon, but with the clarity of a mission briefing. I introduced a new company-wide code of conduct. It wasn't a lengthy legal document. It was a single page I called the Roth Honor Code. It was built on two principles: transparency and accountability. Every decision, every budget, every contract would be open to review. Every success would be a team victory. Every failure would be a command responsibility, starting with me. But rebuilding the company was only part of the mission. A legacy isn't just about preserving what was, it's about building what will be. My grandmother had given me the resources, and my time in the military had given me a purpose beyond profit. A few months later, with the company beginning to stabilize, I established the Eleanor Roth Honor Fund. It wasn't just a charity, it became a core part of our new corporate identity. The fund provides scholarships and vocational training for veterans struggling with their transition back to civilian life, helping them find careers in construction, engineering, and project management. We started hiring veterans directly, creating a pipeline of talent built on discipline and integrity. Roth Enterprises would no longer just build skyscrapers and bridges. We would now help rebuild lives. It was the most fitting tribute I could imagine for my grandmother, connecting her legacy of building with my commitment to my fellow soldiers. We were no longer just a construction firm, we had a higher purpose. One afternoon, I drove out to the construction site of our new downtown high-rise. From the seat of my truck, I saw a figure in a hard hat and a high-visibility vest, his shoulders broad from months of manual labor. He was patiently showing a new, younger worker how to properly tie off rebar. He moved with a focus and economy of motion that spoke of hard-earned experience. It was Brandon. The arrogant sneer was gone, replaced by the quiet competence of a man who knew his job. He wasn't the golden child anymore. He was a worker, covered in a fine layer of dust and sweat. He saw my truck but didn't come over. He simply met my gaze from across the bustling site and gave me a single, respectful nod. Then he turned his attention back to the rookie, his voice carrying on the wind as he explained the importance of getting the foundation right. His long journey of redemption had truly begun. He was, for the first time in his life, building something with his own two hands. A year has passed since that day in the courtroom. I'm standing in my grandmother's office. The company is healing. Contracts are returning, and our reputation is being rebuilt, this time on a foundation far stronger than just money. Behind me, the grand portrait of Eleanor Roth seems to watch over the room, her painted eyes filled with what I like to imagine is approval. My war is over. I fought for my grandmother's legacy, and I won. The journey to restore Roth Enterprises to its former glory, and beyond, will be long. There will be new challenges, new battles to be fought in boardrooms and on construction sites. But I am no longer just a soldier reacting to a threat. I am a leader, a builder. I am the guardian of my family's honor. Looking out at the Denver skyline, a city my grandmother helped to build, I feel a sense of profound peace. My mission is clear. I am ready to lead my unit forward, leading my unit forward, and that unit now includes you. Thank you for being my witness through this entire campaign. My story is one of rebuilding a legacy, but I know it's not the only one. Each of us has an honor to uphold and battles we must face, often in silence. My hope is that my story has served as a reminder that you are never truly alone. If you believe in the power of resilience and want to hear more stories of strength overcoming betrayal, please subscribe to this channel. Hit the like button to let me know you were here with me on this journey. And if you know a fellow soldier in life's battles who needs to hear this, please share it with them. Thank you for your support. This is Captain Alina Roth, signing off.